On Mother's Day, my son handed me a bill. "You owe us for raising you." But Mother's Day is supposed to be about love. About flowers, cards, warm embraces, and whispered thank yous from the children you gave your life to raise. For most people, it is a day of soft joy and cherished family moments. But for me, it became the day I realized that love can be twisted into something sharp, something cruel. It was the day my own son, my only child, looked me in the eye and handed me a bill, as if my motherhood had been nothing more than a financial transaction. I can still hear the sound of the birds that morning, chirping outside my tiny kitchen window as I arranged the flowers in a jam jar. The blooms weren't expensive. Daisies, marigolds, and a single pink carnation I had coaxed from my little garden. I tied a piece of old ribbon around the jar and smiled to myself. It wasn't much, but it was heartfelt. I spent hours baking that morning, making his favorite, an apple pie with cinnamon, the way I used to when he was a boy. My kitchen smelled of warm sugar and browned crust, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe today would be different. Maybe, despite the cold distance I'd felt from him in recent years, we could share a little warmth again. I wrapped the pie carefully in foil and placed it in a worn basket, along with the flowers and a simple card I had made. On the front of the card, I had drawn two hands holding each other. Inside, in my neat handwriting, I had written, "To my son, thank you for the greatest gift of my life, being your mother. With love, always, Mom." I even smiled when I sealed it. I still had that foolish hope that somewhere, buried under his busy life, his expensive house and his wife's sharp tongue, there was still the boy who used to cling to my skirt and whisper that I was his best friend. When I set out for his house, the basket swinging gently from my arm, my heart was light with expectation. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and I thought of all the other mothers receiving love that day. I prayed silently that mine would not be any different. But when I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the contrast. His home loomed large, sleek, and modern. High glass windows, polished floors, and expensive cars parked out front. I stood there for a moment on the stone steps, my modest dress fluttering in the breeze, feeling small but determined. The door opened, and there stood my daughter-in-law. Her eyes flickered instantly to the basket in my hands. She forced a smile, though her lips curved more in mockery than in welcome. "Oh," she said lightly, "you brought something." I held the basket a little tighter, ignoring the sting in her voice. "Yes, I thought it would be nice to celebrate together. I made an apple pie." She arched an eyebrow. "How thoughtful." The words dripped with sarcasm, but she stepped aside to let me in. Inside, the house buzzed with chatter. Friends of theirs were gathered, sipping wine, laughing over stories I wasn't a part of. My son was there too, standing near the fireplace, his back straight, his suit pressed even though it was just a home gathering. He looked up when I entered, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a softness flicker in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by a cool detachment I had grown used to. "Mother," he said politely, but without warmth, "you made it." "Yes," I said softly, placing the basket down on a side table. "Happy Mother's Day." The room barely paused to acknowledge me. A few polite nods, a few curious stares at my old dress and modest shoes, but mostly the hum of conversation resumed. My son did not embrace me. His wife did not offer me a seat. Still I kept my smile. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, listening to the laughter around me. My heart ached, but I told myself not to let it show. Little did I know, the true sting of the day hadn't even begun. For while I sat there, hopeful, holding on to memories of a little boy who once kissed my cheek with sticky jam-covered lips and promised to love me forever, my son and his wife were preparing something else entirely. Something that would break me in a way I never thought possible. It was Mother's Day. And instead of flowers or love, I was about to be handed a bill. The scent of roasted meat and expensive wine floated through the living room as I sat quietly, clutching my basket on my lap. Around me, people in crisp shirts and glittering dresses clinked glasses, laughed at jokes I didn't understand, and spoke of vacations, business deals, and renovations. It struck me how different this world was from the one I lived in. My little rented apartment smelled of old books and homemade bread. My conversations were with neighbors at the market or former colleagues who still called me Miss Parker out of respect. Here in my son's home, everything gleamed, polished wood floors, chandeliers catching light, sleek silverware resting on linen napkins. I shifted slightly, hoping my son would notice I was still standing. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the room. He smiled politely, but it wasn't the warm grin I remembered from his childhood. It was the kind of smile you give to a stranger at the bank. My heart sank. His wife swept into the room in a silk dress, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Everyone," she announced, her voice slicing through the chatter. "Dinner is served." Guests rose, murmuring approval as they moved toward the long dining table. I stood too, hesitating, waiting for direction. My daughter-in-law's eyes fell on me, scanning me up and down as if I were an inconvenience she had to accommodate. "You can sit there," she said finally, pointing toward the very end of the table, near the kitchen door, closer to the serving dishes. The words were sweet on the surface but bitter underneath. I knew what she meant, closer to the kitchen like staff. I walked slowly to the seat, setting my basket carefully beside me. No one offered to help. No one asked about my day. I smoothed my dress over my knees, forcing myself to stay composed. As plates were passed around, I noticed that the conversations rolled right past me. They spoke of stocks rising and falling, of international travel, of new cars and club memberships. Not once did they include me. I sat in silence, quietly eating, though each bite tasted like ash in my mouth. Then came the first little jab. One of the women, a friend of my daughter-in-law, tilted her head at me. "So, Mrs. Parker, what do you do these days? I heard you used to be." "What was it? A teacher?" "Yes," I said gently, setting down my fork. "I taught for over 30 years. Literature and history." "Oh, how sweet," she said, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't kind. "Such a humble profession. Must be hard to get by on that." Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law leaned forward, her voice laced with mockery. "Oh, don't worry, she manages. We help out when we can. Family should take care of each other, right?" The table chuckled lightly, as though her words were amusing. My cheeks burned, but I kept my eyes on my plate. I wanted to remind them that I had raised the very man sitting at the head of the table, that I had worked double shifts and skipped meals so that he could eat better. But I swallowed the words. My son cleared his throat. "Let's not get into that," he said softly, but he didn't defend me either. He didn't say what I longed to hear, that I was the reason he had become who he was, that I had given everything for him. Instead, he sipped his wine, letting the moment pass. As the meal went on, I noticed more of the same. The sideways glances, the whispers, the polite but sharp comments. To them, I was not a guest of honor on Mother's Day. I was an obligation, a formality they had to endure. I forced a smile, reminding myself that this was still my son, my flesh and blood. Perhaps I was imagining the cruelty. Perhaps I was being too sensitive. But then I caught the smirk on my daughter-in-law's lips as she whispered something into his ear. He chuckled faintly, not looking at me. And that's when I knew. Something was coming. The room felt heavier. The laughter grew louder, but underneath it, I sensed a tension, a performance. My son's eyes flicked toward me again, this time not with warmth but with something harder. I folded my hands together in my lap, pressing my thumbs against each other to keep steady. My heart whispered a prayer. Please let me be wrong. Please don't let today turn cruel. But as the plates were cleared and dessert was set aside, I saw him straighten in his chair. He reached into his jacket pocket. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. And in that moment I felt it, the calm before a storm. I didn't know it yet, but the humiliation was seconds away. And it would arrive not as words, not as whispers, but as a neatly folded piece of paper. The chatter around the table softened as dessert plates were cleared. Glasses clinked, forks scraped, But my son remained unervingly silent, his eyes fixed on the polished surface of the table as though gathering courage. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket. My breath caught. For a moment I thought, perhaps foolishly, that he might pull out a card, a letter, some small token of appreciation for me on Mother's Day. But what he laid before me was not a card. It was an envelope, sealed with precision. He slid it across the table toward me, his hand stiff, his jaw tight. The laughter in the room stilled. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to me, the old woman at the far end of the table, as if waiting for a performance to begin. I blinked, confused. "What's this?" I asked softly, touching the edge of the envelope. His wife leaned forward, her lips curved into a cruel smile. "Go on, open it. We've been waiting for this moment." A prickle of unease crawled down my spine. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. At first, my eyes struggled to make sense of the lines and numbers. Then the words sharpened. It was a bill. An itemized bill. Food, clothing, education, rent, medical expenses. Totals written in black ink. At the bottom, in bold, the words, "Balance due. $183,472. My stomach dropped. I looked up at my son, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this supposed to mean?" He cleared his throat, his tone unervingly calm. "It's what you owe us. For everything we've done for you. For raising you. For supporting you all these years." The room erupted in uneasy chuckles, some laughing out of shock, others out of cruelty. Tears pricked at my eyes. "Raising me." My voice cracked. "I raised you." His wife leaned back in her chair, sipping her wine as if this were entertainment. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You act like you've been some saint. Let's be honest. You've lived off our kindness long enough. The clothes we bought, the roof over your head when you had nowhere to go, the food you've eaten at this very table. It all adds up, doesn't it?" I stared at her, my hands shaking around the paper. That's what family is. We care for each other. We don't keep receipts for love." My son's eyes hardened. "Maybe once. But times have changed, Mother. You've been a burden. You've given so little compared to what we've had to give. It's time you start pulling your weight. It's time you pay us back." Gasps circled the table. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Not one person defended me. The bill trembled in my hands. Line after line of cold numbers blurred before my eyes. Rent for when I had stayed with them for 3 months after my hip surgery. Food expenses for the meals I had shared at their table. Electricity bills calculated down to the penny. Could hardly breathe. This is how you see me. As a debt to be collected." His wife leaned in, her voice dripping with venom. "You're not special, old woman. Everyone pays their way. You've had your time. Now it's our turn." A silence fell so heavy it pressed against my chest. I sat there, humiliated, as if the walls themselves were closing in. On the very day meant to honor mothers, my son, my own flesh and blood, had reduced me to a liability, a number on a page. The apple pie I had baked sat untouched on the sideboard, its sweet aroma mocking me. My card, carefully written with trembling hands, lay unopened on the table. My flowers wilted in their jar. I wanted to cry, to scream, to demand how he could do this to the woman who had carried him, who had given up her own dreams so he could have his. But the words tangled in my throat. My hands fell to my lap, still clutching the paper. The world around me blurred as tears slid down my cheeks. The last thing I heard before I forced myself to stand was my daughter-in-law's laughter. Sharp, cruel, victorious. And in that moment, my heart broke in a way it never had before. On Mother's Day, I wasn't celebrated. I was humiliated. And I walked out of that house with nothing but a bill in my hands and a fire in my soul that would one day turn into something stronger than their cruelty could ever imagine. The walk back to my apartment felt longer than it ever had. My basket hung heavy at my side, though it held only an untouched pie and a jar of flowers that now seemed to droop as if they shared my sorrow. The folded bill was still in my hand, creased and damp from my trembling grip. The streets were quiet, but inside my head there was a storm. Each word from my son echoed like thunder. You owe us. You're a burden. Pay us back. When I finally pushed open the door to my apartment, the familiar scent of lavender and old wood greeted me. Normally it comforted me. Tonight, it only deepened the silence. I set the basket down on the counter, the pie sliding slightly as though it too no longer had a place. I lowered myself onto the worn couch, the paper bill spread across my lap. My eyes traced the numbers again and again. Rent, food, electricity, even emotional labor, scrawled in my daughter-in-law's handwriting with a neat sum beside it. My chest tightened. A sob tore out of me before I could stop it. I buried my face in my hands, and the tears came hot and fast. 30 years of sacrifice, reduced to a ledger. I remembered the nights I stayed up late grading papers while my boy slept peacefully, his belly full because I had skipped dinner. I remembered patching his shoes by candlelight, telling him stories to distract him from hunger. I remembered how, when he was sick, I carried him in my arms to the clinic, my back aching but my heart stronger than steel. And this was what I received in return. I spoke into the empty room, my voice cracking. Was I such a terrible mother? Did I fail him so completely that he sees me as nothing but a debt? I thought of my late husband. He had died too young, leaving me to raise our son alone. How proud he would have been to see the man our boy had become, or perhaps how broken-hearted. Maybe it was better he wasn't here to witness this. I pressed my palms together, trembling. "Oh, John," I whispered to the memory of my husband. I tried. I gave him everything. I thought if I just loved enough, it would be enough. The clock ticked on the wall, each second dragging like a reminder of time lost. I sat there in the dim light, the tears drying on my cheeks, and felt the weight of years pressing down. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Question. A thought too frightening to voice at first. What if this isn't the end of the story? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my mind flickering between past and present. I remembered something my father used to say when I was a girl. Dignity, Mary, is not given. It is carried. And if someone tries to take it from you, you fight for it. I wiped my eyes with the edge of my sleeve. Had I really lost everything? Or had I simply forgotten what I still carried inside me? I thought of the years I had worked as a teacher, the countless students whose lives I had touched. I thought of the small savings I had carefully tucked away, the investments I had made quietly, the little school I had helped start with colleagues long ago. No, maybe my son and his wife saw me as powerless. Maybe they thought I was too poor, too meek, too old to matter. But they didn't know the whole truth. And maybe it was time they did. I stood, folding the cruel bill carefully, sliding it into a drawer where I kept old photographs and important documents. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A reminder of the moment they tried to strip me of my dignity. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror on the wall. My eyes were swollen, my face lined with years of sacrifice, but there was something new there, a spark. I am not a debt, I whispered firmly. I am not a burden. I am a mother. And they will see. The night stretched long, but for the first time in hours, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The storm inside had not passed, but it had shifted. My tears had watered something else, resolve. Tomorrow, I would not be the same woman they laughed at. Tomorrow, I would begin to remember the strength I had always carried. And when the time came, they would learn the price of disrespect. The next morning, sunlight crept timidly through the thin curtains of my apartment. My eyes were sore, but I had slept little. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of weak tea cooling between my palms, staring at the folded bill. The numbers no longer stung with fresh pain. Instead, they ignited something different inside me, a quiet determination. For too long, I had allowed myself to shrink into the role my son and his wife assigned me. The poor, dependent mother who should be grateful for scraps of attention. But that wasn't the whole story of my life. I pushed away the tea and went to the wooden chest I kept in my bedroom. It was old, its paint chipped, the lock rusty. I knelt, dug out the small iron key from under the rug, and opened it. Inside were folders, notebooks, photographs, and envelopes stacked neatly in bundles tied with string. I lifted out one folder in particular, the one labeled Academy. As my fingers brushed the papers, memories came rushing back. Years ago, when I was still teaching, a few of my colleagues and I had pooled our modest savings to start a small private school in a quiet neighborhood. At first, it was nothing. Just 3 classrooms in a rented building, hand-painted desks, and a chalkboard bought secondhand. But we had poured our hearts into it. Slowly, parents began to trust us. Students came. The school grew. When I retired, I stepped back from the daily running of it, but I had never sold my share. Instead, I quietly kept my name on the documents, drawing only a modest stipend that I tucked into savings. To the outside world, I looked like a retired teacher with barely enough to get by. Even my son believed I lived on scraps, surviving only through his generosity. But the truth was, I had built something lasting, something that still bore fruit. I flipped through the paperwork. Annual statements, signed contracts, bank slips. My stake in the academy had grown significantly over the years. My savings account, too, was not empty. Modest, yes, but stable. Enough to live with dignity. Enough to show that I was not the helpless woman they mocked me to be. My lips trembled as I whispered to myself, "You thought I was powerless. But you never knew me at all." I pulled out another envelope, one I had kept tucked at the very back. Inside were letters of gratitude from former students. One from a young man who had gone on to become a doctor. "You told me I could rise above where I came from, and because of you I did." Another from a woman who became a lawyer. "You were the first to believe in me. I carry your words every day." I pressed the letters to my chest. These were my true wealth. Not numbers on a page, but lives changed, hearts lifted, futures opened. And yet, perhaps it was time to use the numbers too. Not for revenge, though part of me longed for it, but for dignity. For proof that motherhood and womanhood did not mean weakness. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Mary Parker," came a warm voice on the other end. It was Robert, an old friend and lawyer who had helped us when we first founded the academy. "Robert," I said softly, "I need your help." There was a pause, then concern. "Mary, are you all right?" I hesitated, my throat tight. "I will be. But I need to prepare some documents. My son and his wife. They think they can take everything from me. I need to make sure they know the truth." His voice firmed with resolve. "Say no more. Come by my office tomorrow. We'll put everything in order." When I hung up, I sat back in my chair, breathing deeply. For the first time in days, my hands didn't tremble. I looked around my small apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the old furniture, the second-hand rug, and smiled faintly. They had laughed at this place, sneered at my life. But what they didn't know was that I had built more than walls. I had built legacies. And soon the world, their world, would see it. I folded the academy documents carefully into a leather folder and placed it in my bag. Tomorrow, I would not walk into Robert's office as a broken mother. I would walk in as a woman reclaiming her dignity. I touched the mirror on the wall, my reflection looking back at me with tired but steady eyes. "You thought you could put a price on me," I whispered. "But the bill you gave me will never match the value of what I gave, and what I still carry." The fire in my chest grew steadier. I wasn't done yet. The story wasn't over. And when the time came, my son and his wife would finally learn the truth. That the woman they mocked, the mother they dismissed, was far more than a burden. She was a force they could not diminish. The following days passed like a blur, but the heaviness in my chest had been replaced by a strange calm. I still carried the sting of betrayal, but it no longer ruled me. Instead, I carried a folder of documents that reminded me who I was, and what I had built when the world believed I had nothing. When I visited Robert, my lawyer friend, he greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes full of kindness. Mary, he said gently, guiding me to a chair. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the envelope, the cruel words, the humiliation in front of strangers. I laid the bill flat on his desk, and he studied it in silence, shaking his head. They really handed this to you? On Mother's Day? His voice trembled with disbelief. Yes, I whispered. And they laughed. Robert leaned back, his jaw set. Mary, you don't owe them a single penny. Not morally. Not legally. If anything, they owe you their lives. But you don't need me to tell you that. He tapped the academy documents I had brought. This is your strength, your stability. If they think you are powerless, let them learn differently. I nodded slowly. I don't want revenge, Robert. I just want them to understand. To see me as more than a burden. He leaned forward. Then let's show them, not in private, but where they cannot deny it. You said your son is hosting a neighborhood gala next week. Yes, I murmured. He invited business associates, investors, all the people he tries so hard to impress. Robert's eyes gleamed. Then that's the place. If they humiliated you in public, let the truth stand in public too. I hesitated. The thought of standing before so many eyes, speaking my pain aloud, made my heart race. I had always been a quiet woman, content with books and classrooms, not microphones and stages. But then I thought of my son's wife's smirk, the way her words sliced through me like knives. You're not special, old woman. And I realized silence would only make their cruelty louder. I'll do it, I said firmly, surprising even myself. The week that followed was unlike any I'd lived before. Each evening I practiced in front of the mirror. At first, my voice shook as I whispered the words I wanted to say. About sacrifice, about love, about the dignity no child had the right to strip from a parent. But day by day, my voice grew steadier. I pulled out old photographs too. Of me carrying my son on my hip, of birthdays where the cake was small but the joy was real, of school uniforms I had stitched by hand. They reminded me of the truth that no cruel word could erase. The morning of the gala, I dressed with care. Not in silk or jewels like the women who would surround me, but in a simple navy dress that I had saved for special occasions. I pinned my silver hair neatly, clasped a modest string of pearls around my neck, and slipped the leather folder into my bag. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw a mother carrying the weight of years, and the strength to finally lay it down before the world. At the gala, the house glowed with golden lights, music spilling out onto the lawn where cars lined the driveway. Guests strolled in, laughing, sipping champagne, their eyes quick to judge. I walked in quietly, unnoticed at first. But when my son saw me, his expression tightened. He hadn't expected me. "Mother," he said stiffly, approaching with his wife at his side. "Why are you here?" "I was invited," I replied, my voice calm. Surely a mother can celebrate her son's success. His wife forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "How lovely that you could make it. Though I hope you won't embarrass us this time." I looked at her steadily. "Don't worry. Tonight I won't be the one embarrassed." She blinked, uncertain for once, as I walked past them into the glittering hall. The evening rolled on with speeches and toasts. My son stood proudly at the head of the room, boasting of his ventures, his home, his family. People clapped, nodding, impressed. And then, when the applause died down, I rose from my seat. My heart thudded, but my steps were steady as I walked toward the microphone. Murmurs rippled through the room. "Excuse me," I said softly, my voice carrying more strength than I expected. "I have something to say." Every head turned. My son's face drained of color. His wife's smile froze in place. The moment had come. The room hushed as I stood at the microphone. Dozens of eyes fixed on me. Men in pressed suits, women in glittering gowns, glasses of champagne frozen halfway to their lips. The clink of silverware ceased. Even the music paused as though the strings themselves held their breath. I could feel my son's stare drilling into me. his wife whispering frantically at his side. But I didn't waver. My hands gripped the edges of the lectern, and for the first time in years, my voice rang out steady and clear. "Good evening," I began. "I know many of you don't know me. My name is Mary Parker. I am not here as a guest of wealth or of status. I am here as something much simpler and perhaps far greater. I am here as a mother." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some smiled politely, others leaned forward in curiosity. I glanced toward my son. His face was pale, his lips pressed tight. His wife's manicured hand clutched his arm, her eyes burning with fury. I breathed in slowly, then spoke the words that had lived inside me for decades. When I became a mother, I didn't keep receipts. I didn't write down the cost of every pair of shoes, every meal, every sleepless night. I didn't calculate the hours I spent working 2 jobs so my boy could have a future. Because love does not keep score. I paused, letting my words hang in the silence. But last week on Mother's Day, I was handed something I never imagined I would see in my life. Bill. A bill written by my own son and his wife, calculating in cold numbers what they believe I owe them for the privilege of being his mother. Gasps echoed. A murmur of shock rippled through the guests. Several turned their heads sharply toward my son, whispers already beginning. "Yes," I said firmly, my voice rising. "A bill. For food, for shelter, for love. A piece of paper that reduced 30 years of sacrifice to a balance due." I opened my folder and held up the envelope. The room collectively leaned closer, as if the cruel weight of the truth might spill from the page into their own laps. I was humiliated that day. But as I sat in the quiet of my little apartment, I remembered something important. I am not powerless. I am not poor. And I am not a debt to be repaid. I laid the cruel bill down on the lectern, then lifted another set of documents from my folder. Some of you may not know that I spent over 3 decades as a teacher. And years ago, together with colleagues, I founded a small academy. That academy has grown into a respected school, shaping hundreds of young lives every year. And though I have retired, I remain its co-owner. Gasps again. This time tinged with admiration. Heads turned back toward me, no longer dismissive but intent. My son and his wife believed I had nothing, I continued. That I was dependent on their crumbs of generosity. But the truth is, I built something with my own hands. I invested. Saved. I poured my heart into students who now stand as doctors, lawyers, teachers, leaders. That is my wealth. That is my dignity. I spread the letters of gratitude from my former students across the lectern like treasures. This is my repayment. Not a bill, not a balance due, but lives changed. And no piece of paper can put a price on that. The room was silent, charged, heavy with judgment. Not for me, but for the son and wife who now sat stiff and exposed. I turned my gaze directly on them. You thought you could measure me in numbers. You thought you could shame me into silence. But tonight I stand here to say, I owe you nothing. Not 1 cent. Not 1 apology. Not 1 ounce of dignity. My voice trembled only with strength as I delivered the final words. If anything is owed in this family, it is gratitude. And until you can find it in your hearts, you will have no place in mine. For a moment the silence was absolute. Then slowly applause began. Hesitant at first, then stronger, rising until the entire hall echoed with clapping hands and murmurs of approval. My son's face was ashen. His wife's eyes wide with shock. They had wanted to parade me as a burden. Instead, I had revealed myself as a builder. And for the first time in years I stood tall, my head high, not as someone's dependent, but as a woman who had carried love, sacrifice, and dignity farther than they could ever comprehend. The public humiliation they had planned for me had become their own. The applause still echoed in the chandeliered hall when I stepped back from the lectern. My hands trembled, not from fear but from release. For years I had carried silence like a stone in my chest. Tonight I had set it down. But as I turned to leave the stage, I caught sight of my son. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting nervously between me and the guests. His wife gripped his arm, whispering frantically, her perfectly painted smile cracked at the edges. The room that had once been theirs, their stage, their kingdom, was no longer safe. It had turned against them. Whispers grew like a rising tide. "Did you hear what she said? A bill for motherhood. How cruel. On Mother's Day, no less. And she owns a school. Had no idea. Incredible woman." People who had once nodded eagerly at my son now pulled back, their admiration cooling into suspicion. A few business associates exchanged sharp glances, murmuring about integrity and reputation. Others avoided his gaze entirely, as though standing near him might tarnish their own names. My son tried to stand, lifting his glass. "Everyone, please," he stammered. "You misunderstand. It was all a joke. Just a misunderstanding." But his voice wavered, and the excuse fell flat. No one laughed. His wife rose too, her tone sharper. "Yes, of course. We were only teasing. Mother knows we adore her. Isn't that right?" She turned to me, her eyes glittering with desperation, begging me to play along. I met her gaze calmly. "No," I said simply. "You weren't teasing." Gasps rippled. The weight of truth settled over the room like a hammer. My son's wife flushed red, her lips trembling. "You're twisting things." But a woman from the crowd interrupted, her voice loud and clear. "No, I was at that dinner. I heard what you said. You mocked her, and you handed her that paper. There was no joke." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. It was judgment. Collective. Final. My son's shoulders slumped. He looked at me then, truly looked, as though for the first time in years he saw not just a frail old woman but the mother who had once carried him on her back, the teacher who had lifted others when she could barely lift herself. But pity could not erase the cruelty of his choices. The applause that had honored me moments before did not return to him. Instead, guests began excusing themselves. One by one they set down their glasses, shook their heads and drifted away. Business associates who had promised him contracts muttered about reconsideration. Friends whispered about bad taste. Investors who had once praised his name now looked at him with narrowed eyes. His wife tried to salvage it, her voice rising shrill. "You can't all be serious. You'll take her side over ours. She's nothing without us." Her words backfired instantly. Faces hardened. Someone muttered, "Ungrateful." Another said, "Disgusting." And then the quiet judgment turned to action. A man in a tailored suit, one of my son's largest partners, stepped forward and extended his hand to me. "Mrs. Parker, it would be an honor to tour your academy. Perhaps there are ways we can support your work." The room shifted. Where once I had been invisible, I was now seen, valued. My son's wife gaped, her hand flying to her mouth. My son's face drained of color. I inclined my head with dignity. "Thank you," I said softly. "But tonight I ask only for respect. For every mother who has ever given more than she had, only to be told it was not enough." The applause returned, not raucous but steady and reverent. My son sank back into his chair, defeated. His wife's eyes brimmed with fury and shame. They had wanted to parade me as a burden. Instead, they had revealed themselves as the true disgrace. I walked down the steps from the stage slowly, my folder tucked under my arm. The crowd parted for me, offering nods and murmurs of admiration. As I passed my son, he whispered hoarsely, "Mother, please." I paused, looking at him one last time. "Respect cannot be begged," I said quietly. "It must be earned. Tonight you lost yours." And with that, I left him in the ruins of the empire he had built on arrogance and cruelty. When I stepped out of that glittering hall, the night air struck me like a blessing. The stars stretched wide above, indifferent to the small dramas of mankind, and for the first time in years, I felt my back straighten under their gaze. I had walked into that room as a woman humiliated. I walked out as a mother who had reclaimed her dignity. The next morning I brewed tea the way I always did. Measured, patient, letting the steam curl through the kitchen. But the silence of my apartment no longer felt heavy. It felt earned, peaceful, even proud. I had said what needed to be said. And though the scars of betrayal remained, I was no longer defined by them. Still, news travels fast. By midday, neighbors knocked on my door with soft smiles and murmured admiration. "We heard what happened, Mary," one said. "You were brave. You spoke for all of us mothers." The market, strangers approached me. Some hugged me, some shook my hand, others pressed my palm and whispered, "Respect." It was strange to be seen, to be celebrated, after so many years of being overlooked. But I accepted it with humility. Not because I sought fame, but because dignity, once stripped, feels miraculous when restored. Yet not all visitors came with kindness. 3 days later, a knock rattled my door. I opened it to find my son, his shoulders slumped, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller than I remembered, as if the pride had drained out of him and left only the boy who once clung to me after nightmares. "Mother," he whispered, "please, can we talk?" For a moment my heart twisted. Despite everything, he was still my child. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the table, his hands trembling as he held the cup of tea I offered. "I lost 2 contracts this week," he confessed. "Investors are pulling out. People don't want to work with me anymore." His voice broke. They keep saying I disrespected my own mother. That I'm ungrateful." He buried his face in his hands. "I don't know how it came to this." I sat across from him, my fingers folded in my lap. "It came to this," I said softly, "because you forgot where you came from. You forgot who carried you when you could not walk, who fed you when there was nothing left for myself, who believed in you when no one else did. You forgot me." Tears welled in his eyes. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I let pride and her convince me you were a burden. I can't take back what I did, but can you forgive me?" My throat tightened. Forgiveness. Such a simple word and yet so heavy. Part of me longed to pull him into my arms, to tell him that a mother's love never fades, that he would always be my son. But another part of me remembered the sting of that bill, the laughter at my expense, the nights I wept alone. I breathed slowly. "Forgiveness is not free," I said gently. "It must be earned. You cannot erase cruelty with apologies. You must live differently. You must treat me, and all people, with the respect you once denied me. Only then will forgiveness grow." He nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. "I'll try, Mother. I'll try." But when he left, I remained at the table, staring into my tea. A strange calm washed over me. I had not slammed the door, but neither had I flung it wide open. Forgiveness would take time. Trust would take longer. That night, I opened the letters from my former students again. Their words lifted me, reminded me that love had not been wasted, that even if my own child had faltered, others had carried my lessons into the world. I realized then that motherhood is not only measured by blood. It is measured by the lives you touch, the love you give, and the dignity you refuse to let go of. My son might one day rise again, or he might not. But I would not spend my remaining years waiting for his gratitude. I had found my own peace. And as I sat by the window, the city lights flickering below, I whispered into the night, "I am not a bill. I am not a debt. I am a mother. And that is enough." The weeks that followed were quiet. My life settled back into its rhythm. The market on Saturdays, tea with old colleagues on Sundays, the gentle company of books during long evenings. Yet beneath the calm, something within me had changed. I walked with my head higher. I no longer flinched when people spoke of wealth, or when others whispered about my son's downfall. The truth had already been spoken, the dignity reclaimed. And with that dignity came freedom. From time to time I saw him. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with his wife trailing a few steps behind, her once sharp tongue now subdued into silence. They would stand awkwardly at my door, bearing flowers or gifts, their eyes searching mine for the warmth they had so easily discarded. I accepted their presence politely, but my heart held them at a distance. Trust, once broken, does not mend with trinkets. It heals only with humility, patience, and actions that speak louder than words. And so I watched. I watched for change. I watched for sincerity. One afternoon, as I was leaving the academy I had helped to build, I saw my son standing by the gate. He watched the children laughing in the courtyard, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to their parents. His eyes softened, and I saw a flicker of something I had not seen in years, remorse and perhaps understanding. "Mother," he said quietly as I approached, "I've been volunteering here at the school, helping with repairs, tutoring when I can. I want to learn what it means to give without expecting anything back." For the first time, I let my hand rest briefly on his. "That is a start," I whispered. But whether or not he ever fully earned my forgiveness, I knew my story was no longer chained to his choices. My worth was not tied to his recognition, nor to the cruelty of his wife. My worth had always been there, in the nights of sacrifice, in the students whose lives I had touched, in the quiet strength I carried through storms. The bill they gave me still sat folded in my drawer, but it no longer pained me. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation, but a reminder that when someone tries to reduce love to numbers, they only reveal the poverty of their own soul. On the next Mother's Day, I did not wait for my son's invitation. I hosted a small gathering at the academy instead. Former students came, some with children of their own. They brought flowers, songs, and laughter that spilled out into the courtyard. One of them, now a doctor, hugged me tightly and said, "You were the mother I needed when mine couldn't be there." I will never forget that. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not bitter this time. They were sweet, healing. And as I looked around at the faces, young and old, grateful and kind, I understood something clearly. Motherhood is not about being repaid. It is about giving. It is about planting seeds you may never see bloom, about pouring love into others even when it costs you everything. And the reward, if it comes, is never in money or bills. It is in respect, in gratitude, in the knowledge that you lived with dignity. So if you are listening to my story tonight, remember this. Never treat a parent as a debt. Never mock the hands that fed you. Never forget that the sacrifices you dismiss so easily may one day be the very foundation holding your world together. And if you are a mother or a father, or anyone who has ever poured yourself out for another, stand tall. Your worth is not in what others repay, but in what you gave freely. Because love is not a balance sheet. Love is not a bill. Love is the only debt that multiplies when it is given away. And so, my story ends not with anger but with peace. My son may still learn or he may not. But I walk forward with my head held high, knowing I have nothing to repay, nothing to prove. I am not a burden. I am not a debt. I am a mother. And that is more than enough. Thank you for watching my stories, where family can hurt the most, but dignity always finds a way back. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart.